Hi, I'm Sean Owen and welcome to the EVIT website. During the AME 2009 conference held in Malaga earlier this year, Chara Balasubramaniam and Steve Malachowski from St George's University of London were awarded second prize for Best Poster Presentation for their study entitled Google, Wikipedia or Tutors, What Do the Students Choose? Here they talked to EVIT about the rationale behind the study and what the results mean for future development of the medical curriculum. So, Chara, can you talk us through the rationale behind this study?
Sure, Sean. This was actually a study that stemmed from a little project that we were doing on virtual patients primarily. But one of the things that we tried to do is we tried to evaluate not just the work that we were doing in virtual patients, but also try and get an opportunity to sit with students and discuss with students and find out a little bit more about their perceptions of e-learning resources, not just with virtual patients, but e-learning resources in general. So we actually got a group of St George's students in. We got them to come into our e-learning unit at George's, and we got them to sit in front of a computer, evaluate some different types of e-learning resources, and then just give us some feedback about how they felt about the e-learning resources, what their perceptions were, how they found them, and just try and get a bit more insight into our own students and how their mindsets were with regards to e-learning resources. And we did this in the form of a survey primarily.
So what were you really looking for in this study?
In this study, we decided to focus in on just one small part of the larger project that Chara was describing. We're in a fortunate position here at St. George's in that we really do conduct a lot of work with e-learning. And so we picked the part that we think matters the most. And the part that mattered the most in this situation was, how do students find e-learning resources, primarily web pages, for their studies in medical education. We talk a lot amongst ourselves, we got the opinions of others, we did some reading. We came up with, 5 areas, I believe? 5 options for students, asking them how do they find e-learning resources they respect. Do they get recommendations from their tutor? Do they ask another student? Do they use a library catalog? Do they use Wikipedia, Google Scholar? Or do they get their information from Google by conducting a simple Google search? Now, I want to take a small aside that does talk about the results a bit, addresses the results. A lot of research in this area would simply ask students a Likert scale question. Do you strongly agree, strongly disagree? And the option might be, I like using Moodle, or I like using Google. Do you strongly agree or disagree? I get ideas from my tutor. Well, that's a little bit too easy sometimes, too generic. And so we put students in a little bit of an uncomfortable but useful position. We had students rank order the 5 options I just mentioned, and I'll talk more about the 5 options in a moment. So we asked them, here are 5 ways where you might find e-learning resources. Please tell us the most important, the second most important, third, fourth, and the least important. And in the end, the results surprised us, but also it was comforting in some ways. Many people who hear about this study, they immediately think that Google's going to win. Students are going to go to Google because that's what the Google generation does. And they're not going to go to the library, and they're certainly not going to listen to tutors. In the end, tutors are number 1. Google, dead last. So we found that quite comforting. Apparently medical education students do think about where they get their sources of information from. I'll go through some exact numbers for those of you out there who might like numbers. 55% said tutors are most important. That's a good percentage. The second highest was recommended by another student. 34% of students picked that. Searching a library catalog was third. 41% of students picked that as third. Using Wikipedia or Google Scholar, that was fourth. That was 34.8% of students. And as I said, dead last was Google, and that was 40.4% of students. The whole sample was 94 students, a respectable sample. We do want to repeat this study in the future, by the way. We have some additional questions. We've gotten some good responses to this research. We want to repeat it with more people, make the study more rigorous. To finally get to the point of what are our key findings. We found, after thinking about these results, that what really matters is that tutors have to make the recommendations. about which e-learning resources are good or not so good. Because if tutors don't, they're missing a wonderful opportunity to give students the guidance that they're asking for. Another interesting finding in this study that I forgot to mention, my apologies, is that about 21% of students in this study, they use online resources at least as much as they use a textbook. So there's 21% of students that tutors have a very strong influence over. And so when I present this data in different workshops and courses, I tell tutors that. It's like you have a wonderful, simple opportunity to do something that computers can't, to form an opinion and to give that opinion to your students. And that's been a very welcome message to hear, and I think it's quite refreshing, actually.
Will the results of this study impact on curricular development in medical education in the future?
We're doing our best. The results have been well received at the AAMI conference. I present in several courses and workshops here at St. George's, probably between 2 to 4 a month. I use this data in every single presentation I give. As I mentioned previously, Chara and I are anxious to repeat this study with a larger sample. We also are going to ask tutors how they do or don't get information to share with students, along with some other questions we're working on. So in any case, we want to build in this study, present the results further, and publish the results. We believe this is very publishable information. So we can't make any promises, but we're doing our best to disseminate the information.
I think I'd probably add something to support that. Certainly the statistics around how often students used e-learning resources in comparison to textbooks was really interesting. I think it's still quite clear that the textbook still remains the #1 resource for the student. I think there's no doubt in that, and our results show the same. But what's interesting, as Stephen pointed out, is a larger number of students. These aren't numbers that you can argue with. Over 50%, in fact, of the students use e-learning to support their teaching and learning, or to support their learning. And that's a very strong statement, again, to go back to our academics with. And then armed with the Google study, I think this is slowly changing teachers' perceptions. Certainly myself, maybe this is the reason why this is surprising, and certainly for ourselves it was surprising, is because normally when we try and find out things, I generally tend to use Google. But maybe that's just me, and you almost expect the students to do the same thing. But I think the students of this generation are pretty au fait with this and know well enough that if they were to type something into Google, what you get back in return might not be what you expect, or it might not be trustworthy, and actually going with your tutor in the end, knowing full well that that's the same tutor that's probably going to assess you and set your exam questions, might be a better bet.
Definitely, absolutely.
For further information about the EVIT programme, please explore the EVIT website, and for news and updates you can follow us on Twitter on www.twitter.com/virtualpatients, or you can even join our Facebook group at www.facebook.com/virtualpatients.